Hello everybody, today we're going to do another Callisto Reads review and spoiler. This time we're going to look at These Fleeting Shadows by Kate Alice Marshall. If you say, I don't care, just tell me what you think, this is an insta-buy. I believe that people call this young adult. I'll be very frank with you, and I've said this before, that I don't really understand what this really means. Because in Germany, when I was growing up, we didn't have middle grade and young adult. You had children's books up until the age of 10, and then you read everything else. This book contains serial child murder, gaslighting, body horror. So I'm not sure if this is young adult. And I'm also not sure at what age I would have enjoyed this. I was always reading way above my age group, but it is a book that uses a literary device which nearly made me DNF it because I thought it was bad editing. Like in Das Buch by Holbein, where the same thing or similar thing happened. I was like, if you cannot even sit down and pay an editor to make sure that continuity is paid attention to, don't even try and sell a book to me. I persevered in both cases, and in both cases it turned out that what I was perceiving as editorial inaccuracies or simple sloppiness on the part of the author had a deeper meaning, which revealed itself in the end and made perfect sense. I will also say this is a book you would like to read twice, because on the second reading, you will find more information. You will understand the story better. That's simply how this works. And I will also say, for those of you who know about literature, this is a weird tale which can hold its own compared to, I would say, Algernon Blackwood, who in my opinion is the best writer of weird tales. I've read everything that H.P. Lovecraft has ever written, including most of his letters. I don't like Lovecraft. I think he's totally overrated. He's written maybe 2 or 3 stories which are really good. But Algernon Blackwood is the king of weird tales, and I believe that Miss Marshall can definitely compete with him. There is some horror in it. It's not horrific. There is some creeping terror in there, but it is a damn good book. So, now I'm going to tell you what the book is about, and there's going to be spoilers throughout. Helen Vaughan doesn't know why she and her mother left their ancestral home at Harrow Stone Hall, called Harrow, or why they haven't spoken to their extended family since. So when her grandfather, Leopold, dies, she's shocked to learn that he has left everything, the house, the grounds, and the money to her. Side note, there are also more siblings. So Helen's mother has siblings. Caleb is the oldest, and Victoria is a sister of hers. And traditionally, it would always have gone to the male heir, and there is a proviso in the last will that her grandmother, Leopold's wife's inheritance is protected regardless of what Helen does or chooses not to do. If Helen, however, decides not to follow through on her part of the last will and testament of her grandfather, everything else will go and nobody inherits anything except her grandmother. So her uncles, her aunts, Leopold's brother Eli, who's still around as well, wouldn't get anything. So it is in the best interest of the family that she actually stays and fulfills the requirements set down in this testament. The inheritance comes with one condition. She must stay on the grounds of Harrow for 1 full year. And we're talking grounds. This is a sprawling mansion. It's huge. And I think it's got 40 acres of, or was it 400 acres of grounds, woods, you know, like everything. And including their own cemetery. There is more at stake than money. For as long as she can remember, Harrow has haunted Helen's dreams, and now those dreams have become a waking nightmare. Helen knows that if she's going to survive this year, she needs to uncover the secrets of Harrow. Why is the house built like a labyrinth? What is digging the holes that appear in the woods and each night? And why does the house itself seem to be making her sick? With each twisted revelation, Helen questions what she knows about Harrow, her family, and even herself. She no longer wonders if she wants to leave, but if she can. So we know this is about Helen Vaughan. Now, Helen Vaughan is described as a little bit of a weird child. So basically, the first thing we learn about her is how she digs up a fox's skeleton. She'd found a fox roadkill by the roadside. She's basically wrapped it in tarpaulin and put it into the ground so that the insects and bugs would do their work to strip it of its flesh so that she can get at the bones, because she uses the bones to to make things, you know. We also learn that she's homeschooled, that people usually don't like her at all. And those people that do like her usually start disliking her after a while. We also learn over the course of the story that there was an incident which meant that they had to leave the place where she was at school, and that it was presumed that she had taken scissors to a girl's eyes and gouged her eyes out, which in and of itself is already, again, is this really young adult? I don't know. So she and her mother's partner Simon, unfortunately I forget what the mother's name is, but I do remember Simon's name, go to Harrow Hall. And basically they meet the family. There are also children of her generation. Celia and Desmond, they are half brothers and sisters. And we meet Caleb and his wife. We find out that Caleb and his wife, Sandra, had a daughter who is a lot younger than Helen, because Helen is about 16, 17, maybe already cusping on 18. And they had previously left about 10 years ago. So they left, her mother and Helen left Harrowstone Hall when Helen was very young, about 8 years old. But she doesn't remember anything. And over we learn that there are certain things that she simply doesn't remember. And of course, when we think back to what happened to us when we were 8, there are certain times, I mean, I can't remember my Christmas when I was 8, you know. Anyway, she basically meets the family, and the family is quite nice. I mean, you know, her grandfather's wife is a bit weird, but, you know, old people. Eli is pretty nice. So is Caleb. And we learned that Caleb's daughter, Jessamine, had died at a very young age, about 8, 9. I want to say the previous year. And they didn't even know. Helen and her mother didn't even know that there was a cousin / niece that they could have met. And Jessamine had simply died of heart failure. Like her grandfather, Leopold, had also died of heart failure. Having said this, Leopold was quite an old man. So, you know, not as old as maybe usually the Vaughans get, but, you know, considerably older than, of course, Jessamine. He was about 70-something. So basically, once it's disclosed what has to happen for everybody to get their inheritance, her mother is like, no, we're leaving, we're not staying, you're not taking this, we don't care. And she's like, well, Mum, we could really use the money, you know, we are broke. And, you know, like, have a nice home that nobody can evict us from. You know, and I'm homeschooled anyway, so a year will pass like nothing. And she finally gets her mother to agree to this. And her mother then says, okay, but I need to go home and, you know, like, get our things. That's basically how this works. So the mother and her partner leave, and they leave Helen there. Helen explores, of course, this labyrinthian building, which brings in the Gothic element, obviously, because the house is really important. And the house is spooky, and it's old, and it's got dead ends, and it's built in such a way that you wouldn't even say it's necessarily practical. Nobody would build a house like this. It's like in Ghostbusters 1. Nobody builds like this, you know. And she also meets Bryony, who's about her age, refuses to come into the house, and who says, I'm the Witch of Harrow, and I'm here to protect the dark soul, the other. So there's something going on. Because also, Helen encounters weird things, and she believes that these are ghosts, but the Witch of Harrow tells her, there are no ghosts in Harrow, which makes it sound like there are ghosts, but they simply don't show up in Harrow, which again begs the question, why wouldn't they? Is there something worse here? And she sees things. She believes Jessamine, whom she's never met, but she's seen a painting of her, and she sees her grandfather Leopold appear. She also encounters other, a lot less pleasant things, which actually attack her. And over time, she realizes that there is something really weird going on. And this is also part and parcel of, I still have a cold, sorry, how the story unfolds and how the story is being told. Because I like suspending my disbelief, but I like rationally sound writing, where I'm like, I want structure. If somebody gets up in the morning, or if somebody is starting to live in a new place for a year, I want to know what their daily life is like. When do they get up? I mean, there are bells that call people for lunch, dinner, and breakfast. Then I want the bell to ring, and then I want to see, okay, so they go down to breakfast. Is there help? Do they have servants? Who gives you the breakfast? What kind of stuff do you have for breakfast? Then what do you do when your mum is still far away because she's basically closing down her own house and basically finishing up her job and so on and so forth? How do you spend your day? And it becomes a bit weird. The whole storytelling became really weird. It was like sometimes wading through molasses. I felt like the continuity was missing. You start by breakfast and then suddenly, the day seems to end, and then she jumps to another date in the future and you kind of go, what the hell is going on? And I was beginning to get annoyed because also I'm a role player, and in role playing it's really important to always know how much time has passed telling the story to where you are, which could be 2 sessions, 6 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, but also how much time has passed in the story. So, for example, a role-playing session can cover weeks or months in 3 hours, but it can also mean that you may be covering months, that you may be taking months to simply play out through a whole week, depending on how often you play and how long you play. So for me, this whole time element is very important, and I also want my prose to behave like that. I want to understand how time passes, and if you decide to jump into the future, I want you to tell me, give me dates. Say a week has passed. And I was beginning to get grumpy. And then she meets up with Bryony, the witch. We find out that she's actually secretly in love with her. Well, maybe not so secretly, but Helen is in love with Bryony. So, and I will tell you this, the Sapphic story is shown throughout. So if this is a problem for you, don't buy this book. And Helen and Bryony kind of make up, because Bryony says, I don't really like you, but I also don't dislike you. It's kind of like a weird situation that they're in. And it turns out that Bryony believes that there is the dark one, the dark soul, the other, which is a good thing and like really a benevolent thing. And Helen begins to think that this other that's creating all these figments, those monsters, can't be good, because it is actually creating terrible entities that roam the place. And they find 2 things. They find a list of girls called the Harrow Girls, because over the years girls have gone missing. And all these girls, there is a list, and there's also a couple of pictures, share one thing in common with Helen and everybody at the Harrow. All of the Vaughans, they have really dark eyes. Dark brown eyes. But they're all from the village. So they've been getting lost. Or died, miraculously, strangely, fallen into a river, being, I don't know, dying of heart failure, who knows. And they all share that Vaughan look, the dark eyes. And they discover a diary, which they can't read because it's in a cipher. But Desmond is a really intelligent guy, and they send it to him, and he starts translating it. And he finds that the first Vaughan, Nicholas, had a friend, a doctor, I want to say Raymond. And they took a girl from the street, gave her a lobotomy, because they believed that by doing this she would be able to perceive a god. And she does. And then things get really weird. They manage to bring this god, whatever this entity is, down to earth, and they bind it. And in order to bind it, they build the house. Because they basically imprison this being in the house, and by building this sprawling labyrinthian mansion, they force the entity to keep going through it. And they bind it because it loses its orientation, which in and of itself is kind of, whoa. And they also bind it by blood. And that's where the whole impregnation story comes in. Because the entity can manipulate people's memories and brains and how they perceive the world. So as you can imagine, this is easy to use if you want to make money, like bring in your partners that you want to do business with and, make them spend a night there, and then the entity will change the way they think about things, and then you will be able to make money off them. And as it turns out, all of the male Vaughns go out and sexually assault women in the village, or maybe just make nice and basically then exploit them to impregnate them, and then take the girl when it's 8 years old, bind the entity using their blood to it for a certain amount of time, kill the girl, then take the body and dismember the body and take the different pieces of the body and scatter them, thus scattering the entity. So this dark soul entity is scattered. And over time we learn that actually Helen is that dark entity. It managed to manifest itself in a human body. It made itself flesh. And yes, that does remind me a little bit of the story of the key in Buffy. Made it flesh, molded it, and everybody's memories were wiped and changed so that they thought Dawn was there and had always been there. So Helen does the same thing. She creates herself, so the dark entity manages to split a large portion of itself up and off from the most recent sacrifice, turns it into Helen, convinces Helen's mother that, oh, I've got a child, her name is Helen, and let's run. And that's how this story unfolds. But unfortunately or fortunately, the entity has made Helen and herself, therefore, forget what's going on. And that's part and parcel of the plan. And the plan is to return at one point and take down the whole family, destroy the house, and set the entity free, which is exactly what Bryony, the witch, wants as well. She wants the the entity to be free as well. So that's where we're at. But of course, Helen, the entity, becomes conscious of who she is, and she realizes what her family's plan is, namely to bind her again by taking a random girl and killing her, and again binding the entity to it. And now there is this whole story going on, and we're basically in a dead race between Helen and Bryony on the one hand, and the evil part of the family. Desmond and Celia are not evil. They are actually supporting Helen. They find out who Helen is, and they really help her. And there is a showdown, and it's really dramatic. Helen gets killed multiple times, but of course she can't die. They do terrible things to Helen, including hacking off her hand. You know, it's really gruesome the way they treat this being that they have trapped. But in the end, Helen prevails. She tears down the hall, literally, and she spends an unknown amount of time simply in Harrow Stone Hall, or what's left of it. She basically destroys the house. She destroys and reinvigorates the garden and the whole plot around it, and basically makes it bloom with flowers that don't exist. You know, she really goes all out. This possibly divine entity, which is, first of all, immortal, as we find out, or at least very long-lived. It's only been here for 200 years. And extremely powerful, can manipulate and change reality. So basically there are There are trees there that don't exist, flowers that don't exist. But Bryony comes back. And Bryony talks to the entity, to the dark soul, the other, and basically says, well, I love you. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you look like. Yeah, but I'm evil. It's like, no, you're not evil. They trapped you. They used you. You didn't kill anyone. Because it's true, the entity, except for killing the family, didn't kill anyone. She didn't kill the girls. The Vaughns killed the girls in order to bind the entity to them. You're not evil. But everybody says I'm evil. No, the Vaughns say you're evil. The Vaughns say you're an evil god. But what evil have you done? And think about the evil that has been done unto you. But you have refused to retaliate. Only when nothing else worked did you actually lash out. And it's true. And so the entity flees from Bryony and digs into the lakes, the bottom of the lake, and basically resides there for an unknown amount of time, comes back, but Bryony's still there, says, I love you, I want you to come back. Yeah, but I'm evil. No, you're not. So this goes on for an unknown amount of time, and again, this is this device that we are now in a space-time continuum where time works differently and where it also doesn't matter. But in the end, the entity comes back looking like Helen Vaughn, and the entity says, I could look like anyone, but I want to be Helen and I want to live my love. And the two of them live happily ever after, and it does say that they don't know how long they will live this life, but there are plenty of other lives that they can live together, and that's the end of the story. And when you read it, and when you get to the end, you realize that what I considered sloppy storytelling is actually the effect that the house and the ritual has on the entity, that it's basically forcing Helen, who is the entity, but we don't know it yet, to lose time, to lose track of herself, to lose track of where she is in the house, to lose track of what's going on. And it makes perfect sense, and it is so well carried out. It's unbelievable. We also learn a description of it, and basically it's the darkness before the stars, you know. And I was like, when I was reading this, I was like, this is Lovecraftian. This is like mythos, cycle stuff. And I was really intrigued by it. It's not a retelling of Lovecraftian stories, but it is like mythos related, cosmic horror. And in the afterword, Miss Marshall tells us that she was influenced by the great god Pan, where basically Helen Vaughn is the spawn of the great god Pan. So this idea of a weird scientist doctor finding a girl, lobotomizing her, getting her impregnated by this great god, and then producing offspring, namely Helen, who then turns into a monster and is later, because she starts killing, and later on then is destroyed. She was like, I gave Helen back her own voice and her own life. And that's what I really like, because it is a bit like the creature from Frankenstein. Helen Vaughn in The Great God Pan never had a chance. This Helen Vaughn does. It is the offspring, or the entity, which has been imprisoned, enslaved, and it's now trying to find its place. It's now trying to find a place where it can reside, where it's not being hunted, but also love, being accepted for what it is. And I think this is a very poetic ending to the story. And it is a really, really good book. And I'm so happy that I found this. I want to say it was recommended on Alexandra Roslin's channel. Probably, yes. And it has so many elements of classic storytelling. So first of all, it's a weird tale. You could find this in Weird Tales, those pulp magazines, which unfortunately are quite underrated. When we talk about pulp fiction, it's kind of like negative, but this would have held its own in Weird Tales. It's also got the gothic element down pat. It's got this love conquers all trope. And it's got some really good writing. So this is an insta buy. I give this 5 out of 5. And this would also go to my desert island with me. And that is These Fleeting Shadows by, I keep forgetting her name, Kate Alice Marshall. And this is the Penguin hardcover edition. Thank you, and talk to you soon.